Hello and welcome to Say That Again Slowly, the Cambridge Festival podcast where students at Cambridge University chat with the experts who have contributed to the festival. We try to pair up students with researchers and authors from very different disciplines to bring things back to basics. There are no stupid questions here. My name is Rebekah King. I'm a second year PhD student in the Faculty of English Literature studying the concept of dangerous magic on the early modern stage. Today I'll be interviewing Toby Gurran and Lotte van Beek, who are postdocs at AstraZeneca, Cambridge. So hello to both of you. Thank you so much for joining me today. First of all, can you introduce yourselves? Who are you and what is it that you've come here to particularly talk to me about? So Lotte, if you go first.
Yeah, thank you, Rebekah. So my name is Lotte van Beek. I am originally from the Netherlands and then I moved to the UK for a PhD, which was in York. And then I stayed around and moved to a postdoc position at AstraZeneca. So I'm currently in the structural biology team, and I try to understand how our body repairs DNA. And I really like science in general, for example, because I like elucidating the mechanism, so the why behind the DNA repair problem, for example. And here at AstraZeneca, you have the opportunity to do just that. And not only can you investigate interesting scientific problems, but the results can also directly impact patients worldwide.
That sounds amazing. What an incredible line of work to be in. And Toby, what about you? Are you doing a similar area? Are you in a similar field?
Hi, yes, so I'm Toby Gurran, and yes, so I'm also on the AstraZeneca postdoc scheme, but I'm more computational based at the moment. So I work in the AstraZeneca, it's called the Early Computational Oncology group. So I specialize in oncology, which is one of the disease areas that AstraZeneca investigates. And the main aim of applying kind of computational analyses to cancer is that there's 3 billion DNA bases in your genome, and what you want to look for in cancer is look for patterns and recurring patterns of mutations, and then that will allow you to say, right, this subset of patients will have these similar mutations, therefore we can target them with one therapy, or this cohort has a different pattern. And if you had to look through those by hand, if 3 billion letters would be the equivalent to a stack of telephone directories about as high as a person. So it's just impossible, and that's for one single individual. You need to look at hundreds or even thousands of patients to find these patterns. So you have to apply computational algorithms to search through these kind of these genetic data, and that's one of the things I'm working on in my postdoc.
Incredible, amazing. I've got so many questions about all of that. But before I ask you any more, I should mention that one of the reasons you're here today is because there's a really exciting opportunity coming up at AstraZeneca, and can you explain maybe Lotte, if you talk a bit more about what the R&D postdoctoral challenge is and who it's aimed at?
So this R&D postdoctoral challenge is aimed at scientists who are just finishing their PhD or MD, or are already in a postdoc. So it's within 5 years of finishing your PhD or MD. And we are looking for bright minds with a proposal for a postdoc project that you would like to do at AstraZeneca. And it's basically the Dragon's Den for scientists.
Amazing.
So it can be on anything related to patients eventually. So you can cover any part of the patient journey, have a really good idea, want to explore a new technique, as long as eventually you want to have this impact on healthcare or on patients. So it can be big, it can be small, you can be anywhere in the world to apply. The program is about 3 years, so 2 + 1 generally. And it's going to be driven by the proposals, so the interesting ideas that come in. We also look at the person behind the application, their skills, their fit with the work, what drives them and what they want to achieve. So the deadline to submit proposals is the 26th of May. after which AstraZeneca scientists will look through the proposals. And then in October, I think, at the end of the year, there are live finals in Gothenburg, which is one of our R&D locations, where you have to pitch your project to the panel. And then based on that, you might be awarded a fully funded postdoc position at AstraZeneca to pursue your project.
Well, so it really is like Dragon's Den. You've got to stand up and present.
Yes. So the way the postdoc scheme was run previously, so the scheme that myself and Lotte are on at the moment, was researchers within AstraZeneca would have a project that they wanted to investigate. Maybe they never quite had the time to get around to it, or maybe it was slightly more experimental than their core work. And so they put forward a proposal for a postdoc, and then they'd advertise that position and postdocs would apply. So that's how myself and Lotte have got around to it. But what they wanted to do this year is kind of flip that on its head and not say, let's have proposals internally. They said, let's open it up to any scientist anywhere in the world who has a question they want to research, and then they send them into AstraZeneca. And if they align with our kind of therapy areas, and if they're the core question is, are they going to make an impact to patients' lives and to people with clinical unmet need? And then, as Lotte said, they'll collect. I think the 10 best proposals will then go on to a live kind of pitching competition later on in the year.
Amazing. And you mentioned, so talk about within the areas, the treatment areas that you study. So for someone like me who is a complete layperson, doesn't know anything really about the field of medical research, I've heard of the name AstraZeneca now. You suddenly become more famous, but I don't really know much about what goes on, particularly at Cambridge. How broad is the stuff that AstraZeneca is researching, and what kinds of areas are being particularly scrutinized at the moment? You mentioned cancer.
Yeah, so I work in the oncology department, and oncology is one of the main therapy areas we focus on. But AstraZeneca has a really broad range, as I said. So kind of the ethos of AstraZeneca is to go after the most serious diseases and those with currently the most serious unmet need. So this ranges from things like chronic heart disease, kidney disease, metabolic disorders, respiratory disorders. So they get grouped together into a department called biopharma, and then we have another side of the business which is mainly oncology. But then we have ongoing interests in lots of other areas. So we recently partnered with a company called Alexion, whose actual speciality is looking at really rare diseases, so really rare genetically inherited diseases. So that's kind of expanded the range of interest for AstraZeneca massively. And then obviously, since the pandemic, AstraZeneca has become involved with developing and manufacturing the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. So that's again expanded the interests. So AstraZeneca has a really broad interest across multiple disease spaces. So with the postdoctoral challenge, we're looking for people to kind of submit any proposal for a project related to any of those diseases, or kind of almost anything in between as well. That's just as long as it's related to making a difference to patients' lives and is going to answer really thoroughly answer a scientific question.
What you mentioned just then made me think of a question that I've been asking a couple of the scientific guests, the science guests that we've been talking to. I've been asking a lot of the scientists about creativity and imagination, because it's something that I care about a lot from my background in literature. And it strikes me as being quite important here. You're asking for somebody who is ambitious and innovative, who's got who's coming up with something new. And Lotte, can you talk a bit more about that aspect, about the innovation required, not just for this project, but at AstraZeneca in general? How important is it to come to AstraZeneca with a creative mind?
Yeah, I think everyone really thinks out of the box, and we're not just trying to solve today's problems, but also to address tomorrow's problems. And in some of those cases, innovation is really key. It can put you forward, it can speed up things. For example, the data analysis, which Toby mentioned. So in that sense, yes, you do have to be very creative. And it's daily troubleshooting of I don't know, equipment or problems or logistical issues that you run into. It can be anything in which you can express your creativity as a scientist. And I think within the postdoc program, that's exhibited by the fact that all the postdocs are very ambitious, as you already mentioned. They're very talented at what they do, and each trying to investigate their own scientific problem and drive it forward to achieve a solution which is going to be benefiting patients. And we're also quite international, so that really gives a different vibe to working with everyone. You might get different insights from different areas of the world, which you hadn't thought about before. So yeah, coming to work and working with other postdocs is just really fun. You can always give each other tips. So we do presents in monthly meetings, but also if you run into each other in the lab corridor with a problem, you can usually get a solution from someone. So yeah, the vibrancy and the creativity is really, yeah, that's what I really enjoy about being a postdoc at AstraZeneca.
That's lovely, and it sounds a bit like a university environment as well, where you can have interesting conversations in the dining hall and things like that. In terms of the kind of the end goal that somebody applying to this postdoctoral challenge should have in mind, is it always going to be eliminating a disease?
So in the field of oncology, the challenge of curing cancer is such a huge challenge because it's actually an extremely heterogeneous disease. There's at least 200 or more known annotated types of cancer, and that to some extent comes from the different cellular types in your body from which tumors can arise, and the different organs and different tissues. So curing cancer as one sentence is too large a project for any one person or one team. So what we focus on at AstraZeneca is breaking it down into disease subtypes and areas of a specific condition. For instance, some of our main drivers are lung cancer and breast cancer, where we have some of our core specialty. But even lung cancer is not a single disease. There's multiple different subtypes of lung cancer from which can arise from different subcellular populations and be caused by different factors. And then even within those subtypes, there might be different, as I talked about, genetic patterns. Some cancers will be driven by one mutation, some will be driven by another mutation. So the aim for each project is to go after a specific subtype and find the absolute best medicine for and apply it to the right patients. So if you go back in time to the early days of cancer research, there was a lot of focus on chemotherapy. So chemotherapies are often drugs which stop cells dividing and growing, and you'll dose that throughout the entire body and it'll kill the cancer cells to some extent, but that's why people get very sick from chemotherapy. The tissues that you need to regenerate, such as your hair, your skin, your intestinal tract, they also get attacked by the chemotherapy. So the way that companies like AstraZeneca are trying to target cancer these days is by providing these more targeted therapies, which will only attack a cell which has a certain mutation. And in that way, none of the other cells in the body have that mutation because they're not cancer. So if you just target that mutation, then it should only kill that cancer cell. And those drugs are can typically be more tolerated than chemotherapy. So in that respect, they can both help to treat the disease, but also help to treat the disease in a more manageable way and beneficial way for the patient.
That makes sense. So it's a sort of a refinement of an existing kind of a cure, I guess. Does chemotherapy count as a cure? I don't know if I'm using the words correctly.
It is always difficult in oncology to call something curative or not. What you tend to look at is not to become too morose. You look at things in terms of 5-year survival or 10-year survival. If a drug can increase the 5-year survival by a certain percentage, taken across a cohort of patients, then that's seen as a significant improvement in life. So, but then another real challenge of oncology, and one of the things which makes it such an interesting and a challenging area to research, is also tumors just by their nature evolve. So if you apply a drug to a tumor, then that supplies a selective pressure. And if cells gain another mutation, which might help them revert from that mutation. So I might be getting too deep just into the oncology here, but what we also always think about is what would the potential resistance mechanisms be to a drug? Is there a way the tumors can escape from this target? And then also, is there another way we can target to stop them escaping, etc.? So you take all these considerations into account when you're looking at a specific project.
really interesting. Lotte, do you have any examples that are similar, maybe that aren't from the field of oncology?
So one of the achievements, I think, which AstraZeneca can be very proud of at the moment is our response to the pandemic, which we've had recently. So it was really taking the expertise from the various teams that we have, working together and making things happen very quickly. And that has, for example, generated the COVID vaccine together with the University of Oxford. But also we set up a diagnostic testing center within 6 weeks together with the University of Cambridge and GSK. And I think these are examples of where you have to play to each other's strengths to achieve something big, which seems unbeatable when you haven't started tackling it. And this is in some ways is applicable to this postdoc challenge as well. For anyone who wants to apply, I can recommend to look at your strengths and how you can leverage them to create impact for patients. And think also about what the synergy would be if you would be working with AstraZeneca. So as Toby described, we have these core therapy areas where we have lots of experts in the field, but also the challenges can address problems outside those to still benefit patients. So, think big is definitely the recommendation, but also try and keep it realistic. So in the proposal, you would also be asked to provide a timeline of work to be done within the 3 years and approximately how long each of the steps take. But don't be limited.
Yeah, great advice. And just when you're describing that, I can't even imagine, coming from my field, Renaissance literature, which is distinctly less useful in a practical sense. I can't imagine being part of a field where I, would suddenly have to respond to a pandemic the way that you did. I wonder whether you can talk a bit more about what it was like, what it's been like during the last few years. You talked about how AstraZeneca is this really great environment. You have these interesting conversations. You can work through problems with each other. What was it like when all of that was supercharged by the incredible pressures of living through a pandemic? Toby, what about you? What do you think?
Well, I think I might let Lotte take that question again because, as I said, I'm more speciality in the oncology. Yeah, Lotte has some experience of that other side of the therapy areas.
So it didn't really affect your side of things. You didn't feel the pressure as much.
Well, so when the pandemic first hit, I knew I didn't have any particular specialty in virology. I was focused on oncology, and I had my project. And so some scientists I know, particularly some people from academic backgrounds. So, for instance, people back at the university where I did my PhD, people were kind of scrambling to switch fields, or not scrub, but to apply maybe their insights that they had from their work. Can it be applied to the pandemic? Can any of the analytical techniques they developed be applied not just to a metabolic disease, but to a virology disease? But I kind of took the decision at the time that I thought, given I had really little specific virology experience, I thought I'll just stay in my lane and I'll keep working on what I'm working on and progress it as far as I can. So that was a track I took. Given how long the pandemic has then gone on for, I'm now thinking, oh, should I have tried to change up a little bit at the start, and then maybe by now I would be an expert. But I suppose I made that decision at the time. But then, as Lotte said, we're lucky at AstraZeneca to have so many experts, and also AstraZeneca has a real passion for collaborating with the right experts as well. So the Mene was in contact with the Oxford group, that I think was the Jenner Institute at Oxford, who had developed this system for producing vaccines, and he said, right, let's partner with them ASAP and get them on board, and kind of combine AstraZeneca's experience of large-scale manufacturing and large-scale clinical trials with the developments from that lab. So I think partnering with the right people is another key facet that is really important these days in the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also sounds, you're still studying a disease that will be there when hopefully COVID finally shuffles away. Lotte, what about you? So you were maybe more in the deep end of things, it sounds like, during the pandemic.
Well, yeah, so during the pandemic, everyone had to, we had to prioritize work that was done in the lab and prioritize COVID projects, which I wasn't directly involved in, which meant that if you weren't working on those projects, you were sent home like everyone else. That posed a challenge, of course, for everyone's postdoc projects, because my project is mainly lab based, and of course if you can't go to the lab to do that, then you have to rethink. So that's why I was quite keen to get involved with setting up this diagnostic test center together with the University of Cambridge and GSK. And I have had some brilliant experiences working with people across these organizations towards a common goal. And it was very rewarding. But as Tony said, cancer doesn't stand still in terms of when COVID hit. So other areas had to progress as well at the same time. It's quite challenging. You have your workload and then you add on a pandemic. So it's challenging to manage.
Well done to both of you for all the work that you're carrying on doing. I bet you're sick of questions to do with COVID, so I'll put that to one side for now. But yeah, so going back to the challenge itself, there was a phrase in the literature, it used the phrase complex disease, and I wonder, just for a layperson, what counts as a complex disease?
Put simply, complex diseases are diseases which are heterogeneous, as Toby said earlier. So patients have similar symptoms, but the cause of those symptoms is different, and that's why they might need different treatment options. And that's why you really need to understand the underlying factors that cause a disease. So that is still a big problem in the pharmaceutical industry, to really identify those diseases, because you need to identify the origins of those diseases. So you really need to dig very deep in all the data to find it. So for the postdoctoral challenge, if your idea is aligned to any of the therapy areas, then of course, we have a bigger support network to help your project progress faster. But again, if it's not, very broad science is achieved, and covering all the topics is important to progress, to help patients on their journey to feeling better.
Yeah, the scope of a postdoc project could be lots of different things. And as Lotte was saying, given how complex certain diseases can be, a postdoc project might address a very fundamental aspect of biology. You might want to discover why a certain cell type, correlates to a certain tumor type, or what the role of a particular gene that is mutated in a cancer is, or what the structure of a gene is, so that we know better how to target it with a drug. So, the topic of curing a huge disease, can be broken down into thousands of smaller steps. And so, if your postdoc project would help, if your postdoc proposal would answer one or multiple of these scientific questions, which would help you remove some of the impediments to progressing to curing a disease, to understanding why this cell type is important, therefore we should encourage that cell type to grow and not a different cell type, or how the immune system reacts to this particular tumor type and not a different tumor type. So if you were a PhD or an MD or an early career postdoc, you might have experience from your past research of a certain pathway or a certain disease type or a certain lab. And so, yeah, if you have a question you want to answer and take further, then get in touch with AstraZeneca, send us that proposal, and we'll see if it aligns with our goals. So yeah, that's the kind of thing you could put into your applications.
So maybe Lotte, can you, before I say goodbye, can you remind us of the details of this competition? If anyone's been listening to this and their appetite has been whetted, what should they do?
Then I would recommend you go to the R&D Postdoctoral Challenge AstraZeneca website. Look at the details on this program. So it's for people in their last year of their PhD or MD, and 5 years following that in postdoctoral research. So you write a proposal and then you go through a Dragon's Den style competition on getting it fully funded. If successful, you can join AstraZeneca and get access to all our resources, molecules, experts, techniques to make your project a reality. And you will also be, either you can bring a mentor, or so an academic mentor, or we find one together with you who can help you on this journey. It's a 3-year program. And if you want to submit your proposal, the deadlines for that is the 26th of May.
Amazing. And Toby, do you have any final words of advice and wisdom for any applicants?
Yes. So just to mention, this proposal can be from pretty much any area of science which is going to relate to improving the lives of patients. Obviously, I've talked a lot about oncology because that's my personal area of expertise, but there's also, we investigate lots of other chronic diseases affecting multiple other tissues and organs, such as heart disease, kidney disease, lung, etc. You can look at AstraZeneca's website as well to see our core focus areas and where we're interested in developing new medicines for. And yes, so I would say, have a good idea of the scope of your project when you apply. We want to have a realistically achievable goal for what you can do within the 3 years of your postdoc scheme. So if you're trying to answer a really specific question about how does a molecule work, what's the structure of a gene, what is a cell population doing within a certain tissue or a certain disease, etc. And one other thing I wanted to mention actually was, so AstraZeneca are really keen on publishing in the scientific literature. So maybe historically, decades ago, pharmaceutical companies were quite closed and they could be a bit guarded with their secrets. But actually, what companies have realized is that the best way to make the most rapid advances to help patients is to partner externally and to gain ideas and experience from academics and external researchers. So that's why they started the postdoc scheme in the first place, to collaborate between academia and industry. And so if you're a researcher who's on an academic career track and you're thinking of doing a postdoc in between, maybe aiming to go on and become a professor, doing the postdoc scheme at AstraZeneca, one of the main goals is to publish. We want you to create work which will be publishable and shareable. So if your focus is an academic career, don't be put off about coming and doing a 3-year postdoc within AstraZeneca as part of your eventual career path. We're all about publishing and getting research out there. So yeah, don't let that put you off for any reason.
Amazing. Thank you both so much. I'm really envious of just how purposeful and impactful your research is. And it's quite exciting to think there might be someone listening to this who's going to maybe win and come and help to bring down one of these big bad diseases that you're fighting. So thank you so much. And I'll say goodbye for now.
Bye.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Make sure to follow the Cambridge Festival on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and YouTube for more fascinating events, and follow the Say That Again Slowly podcast for more conversations with experts on body image, time travel, aliens, counter speech and much more. Thanks for listening.